Well, hey everybody, John Rickland here, and here is another WCW themed show. Every WCW Starrcade World Title match ranked from worst to best. If you saw the other three videos that I did, Starrcade themed shows on the build and the road to WrestleMania, if you will, you'll know that despite liking a good amount of the talent on the current WWE roster, the product's kind of burning me out a little bit, so I wanted to look back on the good and the bad from WCW, and I might do it with other promotions also. But I wanted to do it just to vary up the channel and to have a little more fun and to not burn myself out on so much of the current stuff. Now, there are 24 matches for me to cover here, and the reason is in the early days of Starrcade, there were a lot of world titles being defended from Florida and a few other promotions, because Jim Crockett Promotions bought, some other companies and also had working relationships with said companies before they were, before they bought them out. So yes, 24 world title matches, despite the fact we only had, 83 to 2000, so that's like 17, 18 Starrcades. Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit confusing. Now, I'm just going to rank these. I hope you guys enjoy it. There will be a playlist at the end of this video where you can check out the other Starrcade-themed shows that I did. And also, I will have ones up for Great American Bash and Halloween Havoc throughout the year. Probably not in the month that those events happen, but this will just be a way to vary it up, to look back on some stuff when I was really enjoying wrestling, even though I enjoy a lot of the current wrestling now. So let's go with number 24. Hulk Hogan versus the Butcher, a.k.a. Brutus the Barber Beefcake, for the WCW World Title from Starrcade 1994. The fact that Brutus Beefcake, look, nothing against the guy, but the fact that this guy was in a Starrcade main event was a fucking slap in the face to so many people that worked so goddamn hard in that company. And I'm not going to say like he politicked to get that job, or he politicked to get that push. Hogan was the one that pretty much was, the reason, the driving force for him being in that match. But the match was shit. It was absolute shit. Go back and watch it. I mean, Starrcade 1994 had some good shit to it. I mean, Jim Duggan versus Vader for the U.S. title was pretty good. There were a couple other matches that weren't all that bad. This main event, however, not that good. It really, really wasn't. This was pretty goddamn shit. But then we get to number 23. Manny Fernandez versus Black Bart from Starrcade 1984 for the NWA Brass Knuckles Championship. The Brass Knuckles Championship. I'm not saying Manny Fernandez and Black Bart weren't tough. I mean, their reputations speak for themselves. But this was... Why? Why Brass Knuckles Championship? Why? Like, what the fuck? What kind of rich history could a Brass Knuckles Championship in 1980s wrestling possibly have? I mean, I know that even though some promotions were starting to die out and some were really, really starting to die out by 84, and especially by the late 80s, I just can't imagine what the point would be in a Brass Knuckles Championship. Brass Knuckles fighting, or, boxing, any kind of like boxing type stuff, that doesn't really belong in wrestling. Even though wrestling's a tough sport, I just didn't get the fucking point of this. I mean, maybe it's just because I wasn't old enough. I mean, I was only 3 when this match happened. Maybe I don't know the rich history of it. Maybe it's just a bullshit championship that was invented. But yeah, despite how talented both these guys are, what the fuck is the point? Starrcade 84 was a very big step down from Starrcade 83, in my personal opinion. But that being said, yeah, this was pretty bad. Still wasn't as bad as Brutus Beefcake being in a Starrcade main event. Now we get to number 22 for the NWA Florida Heavyweight Championship. Jesse Barr versus Mike Graham, Eddie Graham's son, from Starrcade 84. Again, Starrcade 84 getting kind of slammed here. Yes, this was... I don't know why. I don't know why this happened. Florida at this point was... I don't want to say it was on its ass so much. It was kind of on its ass. It kind of was. I think Florida only lasted a couple more years after this, because I know Eddie died right around this time, and it was terrible. But this was not really that great. It wasn't a bad match, but it's like Florida did not mean what it meant in the 60s and 70s, by the 80s, by especially the early 80s, even though they had some good talent. Yeah, Mike Graham... Sorry, it's kind of like a Greg Gagne situation. He was never going to be as good as his dad, even though he was a good talent. Jesse Barr, I don't really know much about Jesse Barr. We then get to number 21 for the WCW title: Scott Steiner versus Sid Vicious, Starrcade 2000. These two guys who were, I'm sorry, past their prime at that point, Sid and especially Steiner, because Steiner is pretty much immobile. He's still wrestling now, and I'm sorry, still kind of immobile. Not all that great. It just wasn't. It just, why? Yes, Scott Steiner's title reign, his run of like 4 months did offer some stability after the title got hot potatoed so many damn times. And like a 6-month period, I think it was like 15, 20 different, people held the title. Well, I mean, 15 to 20, different title reigns, but I think it was like the same, like 8 people. It was ridiculous. The whole point is, though, this was not a great main event for, Starrcade. It just wasn't. It just wasn't good. It just, whether it was the main event or whether it was the semi-main event, it just wouldn't have been any good. It was really pretty goddamn bad. And unfortunately, the second to last match that Sid would have on pay-per-view in WCW, because then the infamous leg break would happen. That's sin. Ouch. Then we get to number 20, Sam Houston versus Bill Dundee, who was still wrestling in the 1980s, like later 80s. I know Dundee worked for a little bit in global. God, what was it? I think it was like it was like what Memphis became, like in the 90s. But yes, in Starrcade 1986, it was for the NWA Central States Championship. Sam Houston was a good athlete. Bill Dundee was a good athlete. I didn't care about this. I really didn't. Sorry, I never got Memphis wrestling like other people did. I'm not saying I don't see the appeal. I just never got it. Bill Dundee is a good athlete. So was Sam, even though some people might just remember him from working in WWE for a bit. And if you do, I'm sorry, he wasn't used very well there. We then get number 19 for the NWA Mid-Atlantic Championship. Ron Bass versus Dick Slater from Starrcade 1984. Dick Slater was somebody I thought that deserved a little bit better than he got. I mean, he did gain some notoriety and some, fame working in the territories. And then I think suffered a bad back injury because I think it was Slater and Mike Enos as a team in 95, 96. And they seemed to get some traction, and I believe Slater suffered a back injury. He was good. I mean, and Ron Bass was good for what he was. It just nothing really popped with this. Nothing to, again, Starrcade 84, not all that good of an event, despite them trying. It just wasn't as good as 83. Then we get to for the WCW International Heavyweight Championship, which is when WCW pulled away from the NWA. So you had the WCW title and the WCW International Heavyweight Championship. Why? Why did you have this? Why? It was ridiculous. The Boss, Big Boss Man, versus Rick Rude, who was the current champion. Starrcade 93 is okay. It was a very WWF era match in WCW because it was two former WWF guys. Rick Rude was much more established in WCW by this point, as he had been there for a couple years, I think about 2.5 years by that point. The Boss had just come over there. He was the Boss, and he was the Guardian Angel, then he was, Ray Traylor, going by his actual name. It was okay. It wasn't anything great. Starrcade 93, I enjoyed. This was not a match I particularly enjoyed, though I will say, for what it was, and given the fact both these guys had more miles on their body than they would have just a few years before, even though Ray had only been in wrestling for 6 years by that point, and Rick Rude had only been in, I think, for about 8. They had more miles on their body, and while not fantastic, it certainly wasn't bad. We then get to the NWA National Heavyweight Championship. No, not amateur wrestling, but it's Buddy Landel versus Terry Taylor, Starrcade 1985. It was okay. Buddy Landel, his story is well documented of him self-destructing his own career. Terry Taylor, well, he was somebody that probably could have maybe been less of a creep and been maybe a little bit better, maybe a little less cocky, though he was a great athlete and was involved in one of my favorite matches in Starrcade history against Nikita Koloff at Starrcade 87. This, however, not that good. It was decent, but something about it just didn't pop. Now, that's just my personal opinion. I'm sure there are a lot of people that would like this. I just didn't. And then we get for the UWF Heavyweight Championship. UWF, Mid-South. Dr. Death Steve Williams versus Barry Windham from Starrcade 87. This match only lasted about 7 minutes and ended really in a stupid fashion, but this was actually a really well-paced, hard-hitting match that if it had not, just suddenly ended like, what the fuck? I can't remember if Barry got injured or they called an audible or something happened. Because I know Barry wrestled after that, but I can't remember if he got injured for like a little bit and they had to call an audible, but it was just a weird finish. But for the number of minutes that it was until just that boom, that pop finish, it was pretty good. Those two guys just hitting each other really goddamn hard. I just wish it hadn't ended so suddenly. This might have cracked the top 10. This might have cracked the top 5 if they had kept going at the pace they were going. But then we get, at number 15, NWA title on the line. Sting versus the Black Scorpion from Starrcade 1990. The Black Scorpion, who was supposed to be various people like Al Perez or whoever. And it was a guy under a mask. Well, then it ended up being Ric Flair under a mask. The idea was a Sting's title versus Black Scorpion's mask, and it was a whole bunch of fluky finish, or fluky shit and everything. You had, black people in Black Scorpion gear try to interfere. Sting beats the Black Scorpion. Horsemen interfere. Gee, wonder who's under the mask. It's Ric Flair! And yeah, it was shit. It was shit. It was not a good. It was easily the worst match they'd had until they had one Impact. I think like one of Flair's last matches, but to be fair, that was also when they were like 20 years older, so what did you expect? This is essentially when they were in, well, Sting was definitely getting in the prime of his career, and Flair still had plenty left in the tank, despite what Jim Herd thought. Yeah, this wasn't a very good thing that was done, and well, Ole Anderson, this is a time where Ole Anderson, I don't think gave a shit what happened. We then get the NWA Mid-Atlantic Championship defended next. At number 14, Crusher Khrushchev, Barry Darsow, basically Demolition Smash, if you didn't know, or Repo Man. But he faced off against Sam Houston from Starrcade 1985. Yeah, I don't exactly get why this happened. And Darsow, I want to say Darsow was injured soon after this. I want to say he was injured soon after this and was out for a while. But with this, Sam Houston actually was a pretty good worker, but this match just didn't really speak to me. It was about middle of the ground compared to like other stuff on this list, but it just wasn't great. Now, again, this is an example of like just too many goddamn titles being around. Now, fortunately, after this, we get to where it's just NWA, WCW titles, and we don't have to worry about any more of this Brass Knuckles Championship and this kind of stuff. And I will have one up of tag titles from Starrcade after, sometime like after this, so you can check that out, because there's more weird tag titles being defended there. But here we go. So yeah, Khrushchev versus Sam Houston, good for what it was. NWA title, Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes from Starrcade 1984. The referee stoppage due to Dusty bleeding over the eye and all that, it kind of took away from it. And I believe that was Joe Frazier. It was good. It was a well-built match. That finish I didn't necessarily care for, because finishing with that on the biggest show, and I know it was totally different back then because there was either closed circuit or pay-per-view. Actually, closed circuit, I don't even think pay-per-view was thought of just yet. I think all this stuff was closed circuit. It was good, but I just didn't like the finish. And I know, again, they did that kind of finish in the NWA and a lot of Southern territories and even other ones. Fluky finishes all the time to draw houses later. This is your big pinnacle, event of the year. You should have a definitive finish. Yes, they built a Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes one more time the following year. But the following year, and a full year later, you built for it about 3-6 months later, it would have made more sense. And I didn't necessarily like that it wasn't their best match, even though it was well wrestled. And then we get number 12, Ric Flair versus Rugged Ronnie Garvin. 1987 Starrcade for the NWA title. Yes, you could argue Ronnie Garvin maybe shouldn't have been world champion, even though I think his work and how good he was in the ring spoke volumes as to his worthiness of being at least a short-term champion. But yeah, obviously Ric Flair had to be the guy and had to be the one to beat him, and that's what should have happened. And yeah, Garvin held the title for a few months and then dropped it right back to Flair. And then Garvin was gone, I think, right after the Great American Bash in 1988. He knocked out Dusty, and then he was pretty much fucking gone. That was just weird. Like, what was it? It was Dusty, Barry Windham, and it looked like Garvin was coming out to help Dusty, and he just clocks him. And Garvin had, there's a reason it's called Hands of Stone. He could hit you really goddamn hard, but it just made no sense. I always think back on that. This match, though, good for what it was. I thought these guys worked well together. I thought they had an underappreciated feud, among Ric Flair's feuds in the 80s. I thought him and Garvin worked well together for what it was. I mean, it wasn't a great feud, but it was a good feud. And then we get, for the WCW title, Ric Flair versus Randy Savage from Starrcade 1995. A pretty underappreciated Starrcade. I may have to go back and watch a lot of the Starrcades and maybe re-rank them at some point, even though I did that like about 3 years ago. Well, like about 2.5 years ago as of recording this video. But like Flair had won a match. It was him versus Luger versus Sting, and it was a triangle match. I think it was like elimination style or whatever. So I think you could go outside the ring, but if you got dumped over the top rope to the floor, you were eliminated. If I recall correctly. It's been a few years since I've seen it, so it was a little bit awkward. But it was like a 28-minute match, and then he faced Randy Savage right afterwards. And you would have thought Savage would have wiped the floor with him. Nope, Flair beat him. Now, I didn't necessarily hate that, but I found it a little weird. But Flair, because Savage had just won the title like a month before. And him and Flair drew some really big houses at like house shows. After WCW had not been doing that great on house shows, had to stop running house shows in 93, 94 because they couldn't draw audiences. But Flair and Savage got a lot of people back. This was a good example of what they could do, even in a short match. I think it was only like 10 minutes. But again, Flair had just wrestled 28 to 30 minutes, so they had to keep it short. I just found it kind of funny that Savage was the one to lose the title here when he couldn't beat a weakened Ric Flair. I don't know. It was what it was, though. Now we get to the top 10. Bret versus Goldberg, Starrcade 1999 for the WCW title. The reason that I'm ranking this high is because had Bret not gotten injured, had he beaten Goldberg straight up, something like that, whatever, it would have actually been great. Because Bret could have been champion. They could have built to Bret versus Goldberg at like Super Brawl or Spring Stampede or something like that. They could have built to something, and it could have had you could have had Goldberg get the victory, get the title, beat Bret, and then they could have gone their separate ways, that kind of stuff. Bret could compete for the U.S. title, because by that point, Bret was going to be on his way out from WCW, even if he hadn't gotten injured. I think that's pretty obvious, because his contract is up in like October 2000, November 2000. So, had he not gotten injured, that could have happened. But with this, yes, Goldberg, and it is inadvertent, I'm not blaming Goldberg here, but it was sloppy. It didn't help that Bret got a concussion, possibly 2 in that match. And the sloppy finish with Piper, counting Goldberg down, or, saying, yeah, you submitted, here's the title, Bret, what the fuck, what's going on? Bret didn't know what was going on. I don't think the fans knew what was going on. It was a really bad Starrcade. It was booked by Russo, so of course it was. Yeah, not really that great. But it had a big feel to it, because you had the old guard against the new guy, the newer guy that had been around only for a couple of years. And yeah, injuries and all that kind of fucked all that up. We then get to number 9, is Nash versus Goldberg, Starrcade 1998 for the WCW title. Oh, boy. Should we zap him with a taser? Good idea? Not a good idea. Horrible. It was garbage. When something is in this industry gets hot, you run with it. You don't zap it with a taser. And that's what they did. Now, look, Goldberg was getting some Goldberg sucks chants. Crowd was starting to turn on Goldberg, even though Goldberg was pretty damn over. They should have gone with Goldberg winning. Had they gone with Goldberg winning, and they lost the title a number of months later, something like that, held it for nearly a year, I know it might have gotten a little bit overbearing, but then you could have actually gotten something out of it. Nope, they did this horse shit thing where Scott Hall zapped him with a stun gun, a taser, or whatever, and then did the finger poke of doom later. The reason I'm ranking it, this high, is it had a big fight feel to it, a huge fight feel. It's just a real damn shame that they fucked everything up. And Nash was champion for like a week, 2 weeks, and that was it. I think he was champion for a week. God, it was just so stupid. Why was it so fucking stupid? Why was WCW so stupid? Why did they shit the bed so many goddamn times? They had WWE on the ropes. They had WWE down for the 10 count. And they let them up. They had their foot on their throat, ready to press down, and they let them up. And I'm not going to really, I mean, not that, me as a wrestling fan saying I will never forgive WCW for that. WCW is dead. But I will never forgive the people involved for doing that. Because it was just stupid. And everybody, I mean, the AOL Time Warner merger that was starting to happen, that wouldn't, take place for about 2 years after this. And just everything involved in fucking this up, I'm so fucking irritated. I did a rant about Goldberg versus Nash. Like I think it was back in December of last year. It was just, ugh. It's still going to bother me. Probably until I'm like 60, 70, whatever it is. But anyway, then we get to Ric Flair versus Nikita Koloff at Starrcade 1986 for the NWA title. It was supposed to be Magnum TA. He got injured. Nikita and Flair had a good match for what it was. Yes, you could have maybe hotshot the title onto Nikita. I got to be honest, I don't think Nikita was ever world championship material. He was a great TV champion. He was a great U.S. champion. But he could never be the guy. Even though they turned him babyface and it worked pretty goddamn well, this wasn't the time to give him the title. I mean, again, you could have hotshot it to him. Magnum probably would have won the title here. But that's the unfortunate thing. And it really is sad about Magnum, how the injuries, the injury ended his career and how his health has deteriorated. That is really goddamn sad. But back to Nikita and Flair. They had a good match. They always had good matches. Because Flair could get a lot out of Nikita, who was limited. Let's be honest. And only was in wrestling for 8 years? I think 8, 9 years, something like that. But he worked he worked well with a lot of people. Even if it didn't seem like he could, hey, he was super over. He was hated as a heel. When they turned him babyface, it worked. He always worked better as a heel. But God, him and Dusty is, I believe, the Superpowers. They were a pretty damn good team. But this is a good match. Of course, Flair had to retain, even by fluky methods. We then get Hogan versus Sting from Starrcade 1997 at number 7. I'm ranking this here because of the hype. Because of the hype around it. And my God, did they hype it. My God, was it big. My God, was it built up. My God, did they do so many great things. Except the finish. They fucked everything up. And they ruined Sting. Oh, Sting was still over. He wasn't over to the degree he was before. I mean, anybody can watch it. Oh, the crowd went nuts. But look at the crowds afterwards. Yes, they went nuts when Sting won. But they were all fucking confused by the whole fast count that wasn't a goddamn fast count, no matter how much they tried to, say it was. It was bad. It was, it had to have been Hogan doing his, doing political BS, playing politics to go over Sting. Because there's no other explanation. Yes, maybe it's just my wrestling fan mindset. I'm obviously not somebody that was there. I was not in any meetings. I'm just basing it solely on what I observed watching it. And I'm sorry, that was a straight political move. It was bullshit, and Sting was never the same after that. And despite that huge buy rate, and WCW still did record business in 98. Then they fucked everything up at Starrcade 98, as I talked about. This was their chance to legit put their knee on WWE's throat and press down. And that's it. They didn't. This is the moment where they let up. And that was all WWE needed. He gave Vince McMahon a little crack in the door. His talent kicked it through. It's a real shame. But anyway, let's get back to, the rest of this stuff. Yeah, I didn't care for the finish. Can you tell? I also did a rant about this in December of 2017. Fucking hated the finish. Fucking hated it. It ruined Sting. It did. Yeah, he was still seen as the icon of WCW. He should have been. He never jumped sides. Until well after WWE was done, or WCW was done rather, until after the wars were done and after he left Impact, and then they came in, oh yeah, he lost to Triple H at Mania 31. Good job there. So now we get to another WCW title match. Ron Simmons versus Steve Williams from Starrcade 1992. I enjoyed Starrcade 1992. I know some people didn't, and that's fine. It's okay to be wrong. I'm kidding. If you didn't like it, that's fine. But two big guys just hitting each other. Steve Williams at this point had been more in wrestling than Ron Simmons. I think Ron Simmons has only been in for a few years. But Dr. Death could have a good match really with anybody, especially at this point in his career, where he's going between All Japan and WCW. And he was doing he was even going during the dying days of UWF and early, his early run in Jim Crockett Promotions before it became WCW. He was going to All Japan. Him and Terry Gordy were the hell of a tag team. I'm going to talk about Terry Gordy and Steve Williams in the tag team video that I'm going to be doing later. But this was good stuff. Ron Simmons' world title reign sure may not be seen as much. I liked it. I thought it was good for what it was. I think he tried maybe a little bit too hard. But he wanted to prove that he could do it. And by God, he worked really goddamn hard. And him and Steve Williams, sure, okay, the finish may have not been for everybody. But it was a good finish. Because it protected both guys. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I liked it. I really liked this match. But then we get to a match that maybe people are shocked I put up so high. It is Masahiro Chono versus the Great Muta from Starrcade 1992 for the NWA title. Masahiro Chono, easy for me to say, and the Great Muta fighting over the NWA title. Brilliant. You really couldn't have gotten two better guys here at this point, even though Chono had his injuries and stuff like that. And Muta was slowing down a little bit. I mean, come on, the guy did so many moonsaults and did so much agility-based offense that even at this point he would have to slow down a bit with matches because the body can only take so much stuff and so much punishment. But this is great. It was, yes, you had, some good power moves. You did have a little bit of high flying from Muta, but you had a lot of ground-based offense, and I enjoyed it. I liked the fact that this was a Japanese-style match. I mean, obviously two Japanese guys, but they worked their style in front of an American audience. I enjoyed it. Sure, maybe the live crowd didn't care for it as much as they should have, but I enjoyed the match, and I thought it was goddamn good. Number 4, Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes for the NWA title at Starrcade 85. Good, much better than their 1984 match. Covered it before. Really good, though. Really enjoyable. I can definitely see why. Of course, except for one guy yelling, woo, woo, in the so close to the camera mic, it was really annoying. But other than that, and the guy was probably drunk. But other than that, this match was absolutely wonderful. It showed the great chemistry that Flair and Dusty have. I encourage you guys to watch this. Another NWA title match, Ric Flair versus Lex Luger from Starrcade 1988. I almost said 98, and then I realized I would have been wrong. Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm having to give credit to Lex Luger. I've done other videos, as far as talking about his matches with Flair. And I did praise a match that Luger had with Brian Pillman at Halloween Havoc 89, or at least I praised it in the past. And I will praise it in the future on the other Halloween Havoc videos that I'm going to be doing later in the year. But this was a great match. No argument. Flair could get a good match out of anybody. He got a great match out of Luger. And it was like a 30-minute classic. It was great stuff and a great main event for Starrcade 88. That was the first Starrcade to not take place on Thanksgiving. So you had 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 5 Starrcades take place on Thanksgiving. This took place a day after Christmas. Still did really well crowd-wise and buy rate-wise. Flair could get a good match out of anybody, and he got a goddamn good one here out of Luger. WCW title match. Ric Flair versus Vader from Starrcade 1993. They hot-shotted Ric Flair into this because of the whole Arn Anderson and Sid Vicious scissoring incident. Once again, stabbing with scissors. I need to word things a little better because otherwise phrasing will be happening a whole lot in the comments. But Flair was able to have a great David versus Goliath match with Vader. And Vader could really have a good match with just about anybody, especially when he was motivated. And, I mean, even if he wasn't, goddamn, the guy's size and his raw ability could just carry just about any match. But it was great stuff. It was a hot crowd. Flair, I think his parents were there. He said goodbye to his family. Did this great build-up with, vignettes and realism and everything. This could be Flair's last match because Ric Flair put his career on the line to face Vader. He obviously beat Vader. But it was good stuff. It was a really good match. It was either this or number 1 for the NWA title, Ric Flair versus Harley Race, Starrcade 1983. You never forget the first Starrcade. Sure, Gene Kiniski as the ref, even though I respect the hell out of Gene Kiniski's legacy, might have taken a little bit away from this, from the match, since he tried to treat it like a regular match instead of a steel cage bloodbath that it should have been. But that aside, this was the premier main event. It was either this or Flair versus Vader, and I went with this because this launched Starrcade right there. This was what people remember from the show. I mean, there was other stuff to remember from the show. This is what people remember, and this is something that people will talk about for years and years to come, because Flair and Harley Race had a hell of a feud, the whole Flair for the gold thing. Everything worked really goddamn well. I mean, Ric Flair winning, it was great stuff. And that great promo afterwards, even with all the blood in his hair and everything, you know, making his hair all red, you know, red tinged. It was really great stuff. So that's where I'm going to leave this video off. So what did you guys think? Agree, disagree with what I said? Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I will see you soon.